So I'm here to welcome my distinguished guests and artists and introduce them and let them take it from here. In the end, I will come back to read out comments and questions from our audience. This is a special event for 12 Gates, personally for me, my three beautiful friends here, something that would be very hard to organize in physical space because we are all in different places on Earth. Kuala Lumpur, San Francisco, Philadelphia, and our audience from many different cities. But before we start this conversation and introduction, I really want to acknowledge the severity of the situation we're facing, especially here in the US with heightened and belated awareness of racism against African Americans. And also acknowledge that we as South Asians and other people of color have benefited from the rights movements fought by Black and from being here in this land. For 12 Gates to be in Philadelphia, of the Lenni Lenape people. I really want to acknowledge that, and I think this acknowledgement is necessarily every time we use our benefits. Having said that, our first guest, one of our first guests, Qasim Riza Shaheen from Kuala Lumpur, is a visual artist and writer based in Manchester. His work uses audience participation, film installation, photography, and performance to explore the space between people and how memory is shared and facilitated. He has been recognized as an international resident artist and associate professor at National College of Arts in Lahore and Islamabad, as well having exhibited in numerous biennales and festivals across countries. Shaheen is currently an associate artist at Home, a Manchester-based hub for international art, theater, and film. Qasim, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, I always say you're our veteran 12 Gates artist. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto is a visual artist, performer, and curator based in San Francisco. He utilizes a multimedia practice to explore the complex histories of colonialism that are exacerbated by current international politics. Bhutto's practice uses these methods to explore the intersections of queerness and Islam. He frequently speaks on the intersections of faith, radical thoughts, and futurity at universities, and has shown his work globally. Zulfikar receives his MFA at San Francisco Art Institute in 2016. Zulfikar, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to this platform. Anne Ishii, and you don't need any introduction, but Anne Ishii is Philadelphia, our own Philadelphia. Anne Ishii is the executive director of Asian Arts Initiative in Philadelphia. Her writings have appeared in multiple publications, including Slate, The Village Voice, and Publishers Weekly. Her translation and editorial projects include the Eisner Award-winning manga My Brother's Husband by Gengoro Tagami, Bat Manga, The Secret History of Batman in Japan, and Massive. Gay Japanese Manga is The Men Who Make It. She is a co-founder of the publishing, fashion, and creative agency Massive Goods, which represents queer and feminist artists from Japan. So, my friends, I have a lot of friends waiting. So thank you so much for everyone who's joining us on Zoom platform. So we request that if we can keep our, if you want to be on camera, that's not a problem, but if we can go mute. And whenever possible, if you have any questions, you can message me through the chat platform, or we can wait towards the end when we will have last 10 minutes. I will keep admitting people when they are joining the session, and really excited to have this conversation. So I had a phone call with Qasim and Zulfikar 2 months ago, and we decided that let's have this session. And I felt like, oh my God, I wish I could convince them sooner. 2 months? Here we are. and thank you so much for being here with us. So from me to you.
Thank you. I'm translating that as taking your baton. So thank you, Aisha and 12 Gates, for organizing this. Frankly, I'm so gobsmacked I get to share this space with all of you. I don't want to discount that Aisha herself is a goddess, and I always say, but if in the company of a group of South Asians, especially South Asian artists, you have to I don't know, I just feel like I have to be extra elegant and extra smart and extra cool And I want to share that in the interest of full disclosure. I was in a really dirty t-shirt until about 10 minutes ago, and I decided I would change into a leather vest just in the spirit of keeping up with my beautiful peers today. Um, so yeah, you mentioned a couple times that we're in different parts of the world, that this is only possible because of, you know, really Zoom and the internet. I guess it doesn't have to be Zoom, but you know what I'm saying. And I was thinking about the conversation Zulfikar and Qasim had through video, this video dialogue. But one of the first questions you both sort of came up with was around, um, you know, maybe I'm going to call it the anxiety of using the internet, but just sort of what it means to be so dependent on digital technology. And as a short counterpoint to this, just reminding ourselves that a lot of this technology was developed by people who are underrepresented for the very deliberate purpose of staying hidden, but also staying findable, right? So I think of all of our queer elders who really developed this space so that we had safe places to meet anonymously, and how wildly different digital media and digital technology and the internet looks today. So I thought I'd just start by kind of drawing a red circle around the very format we're in and what we think about how that translates into your art practice, or just, you know, how you're thinking about yourself on camera, on the internet.
We did actually touch upon this, Qasim, didn't we? Um, there's a really lovely video. If you don't mind, Qasim, I'll speak on this a little bit, and then after. But there's a cute video that Qasim spliced together, and it's on the website. It's composed of it's on 12 Gates' website, and it's composed of various different video conversations. So instead of texting, we all decided, well, actually Qasim initiated a series of video correspondences. And I think maybe it was the second one or the third one. We barely knew each other, and I was already like, well, you know, I feel like there is a separate digital copy of me currently being made out in the world, to be to be utilized for whatever purpose, and who knows if it's even me here speaking to you right now. And this is partially, I think, my addiction to Black Mirror as well. But I think there's, which is a great TV show. I think everyone should watch it. But yeah, I mean, digital technology for queers is really something that we connect to. Like you said, Anne, I think it allows us to both be visible and present, and at the same time as well incognito. There's sort of ways that you can control who views your stuff. There's ways that you can control how you're uplifted. Yeah, there's a lot of potential there for reimagination. Yeah.
I particularly enjoyed these video exchanges, which sort of functioned almost like self-interviews and became, you know, reflective spaces for both of us, especially when both of our art practice sometimes embeds the idea of a constructed autobiography, or we speak within the frame of personal. And I really thought the idea of kind of exchanging video messages was kind of also resonating with some of our art practice. And it was just great getting to know you.
Totally.
And
yes,
you know, this I hear you with the possibilities of the internet and the way that we navigate ourselves as queer people. And I say that in a really broad term of the word queer. To me, queer really is about asserting your difference and standing your ground, regardless of how you understand that. I had the fortune of living in a pre-digital revolution world, but also continue to share the timeline with Zulfikar in a very current world where we are continuing that exploration of the same themes, but in different sort of formats and mediums.
I know for a lot of artists in the margins, or just generally, not acknowledged by the establishment, there's this accusation that that we're necessarily tied to our identities. But I think a lot of us actually think that's what makes our artwork so much better and richer and meaningful. So, I think of when a person attacks us based on that very same identity, um, you know, that's why it is radical to exist, right? That's why it is challenging, because you expose yourself to people who don't love your body, who actually hate your face. So I wonder if you have thoughts on sort of how you exist as a person and as a subject of your art.
I think it is very radical. The fact that in my practice, I am not apologetic about um, including every facet of myself, that I embrace all the complexities and the multiplicities of meanings that emerge from my work without aligning myself to one particular sort of thing, allowing it to kind of bleed, allowing it to kind of evolve and translate in different ways. So I think, yes, absolutely, the fact that we are, as a British artist, with all the complexities of what that means in terms of imperialism and the empire, being there as for several generations, but still being seen as the other, I think it's important that we show a self-portrait of our identities, which includes everything, and we don't sort of create selective portraits for different audiences. And I think that in itself is a very radical thing to do.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, and I think also, I mean, art is the freedom to express. So I mean, if for example, the concern that I'm having is with queer futurity, which is currently my practice. Also, I apologize. There's some construction outside, so if you hear it, forgive me. But my concern right now is queer futurity, and funnily enough, the Zoom bomber said, are you all from a third world country? That's actually a lot of my work is about looking at this term third world and the history of the term third world, which is non-aligned nations, people who are not aligned, historically with the communist or the capitalist bloc. I mean, still very left, of course, but people who said, okay, we're post-colonial nations, we can do whatever the hell we want, right? We will, we will strive, we will continue. And of course, this had its problems on a governmental level, but then on the level of the people that were in these countries and fighting and striving and still under the thumb of both colonialism and oppressive regimes within the country, to be able to say, I can be who I want to be, I can invent my narrative, is huge. And so I think, we put that into art, and especially queer people, we're not given, historically we have not been given these avenues, or queer people, femme people, trans people have not been given these opportunities to say, oh, we can build ourselves, right? So art provides that. Art provides the realm. It's the realm of the imaginary, right? It's the, and I think Qasim, even in in your work as well, to look at the mystic side, the Sufi side, we're looking at the imaginal realm as much as we're looking at the tangible, right? And the imaginal realm does not mean it's imaginary, it's not real. It means it's elsewhere. It's in this other realm. There are multiple possibilities of ourselves in the imaginal realm, and they're all very real, and yeah. So I think I think it's important to maintain that. It's important not to sort of dive into the marketability or dive into anything like that. But yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important that we populate our own scenography in our art practice, whether they're imaginaries or whether they are real, or everything in between the imaginary and the real. The idea that we take that agency to say, well, this is what I want around me. And these are the influences and these are the narratives of past, present, and as Zulfikar's work explores, futurisms as well. in how we kind of live amongst that.
Mm. You know, I want to take another approach to this element of time and space, which is, after all, this is love across time and intergenerational dialogue. But I wonder if you can speak to how language changes depending on how much life experience one has. Because I think, again, about even just how we define queer identity or internet usage. You know, like you, Qasim, I also know life before the internet. So, you know, it's interesting to see that. There's a sort of thinking now that with, I use this phrase very carefully, but Gen Z or just generally younger folks, um, intimacy looks very different now because of the internet, right? So I wonder if you can talk about what it means to imagine a future where we have upwards of 4 different languages to talk about intimacy, queer identity, time, reality. Yeah.
Should I jump in there?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, what does intimacy look like? Yes, I'm thinking that I'm just, and I think Zulfikar and I touched on this in the conversations and how queer spaces have evolved. And I think it
Yeah.
was in reference to the stud space in San Francisco being closed and all the histories of those interactions. I think one of the things that I noticed the most about the shift in my own lifetime, pre-internet and post, is the pace, the
Mm-hmm.
pace of life, pace of things. I think there's a lot of information, most definitely, but that doesn't necessarily translate into knowledge, and furthermore doesn't necessarily mean wisdom or and all of those things around consciousness and how we absorb information. I think pace needs to be kind of really thought about. The time it takes to read a book, you know, we haven't changed that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we haven't been able to change in this time that we live in how long it takes to read a book. And I think we need to value that just as we need to value human real conversation, real connections, as well as virtual ones. You know, I feel like I haven't aged only because I've embraced what's around me and constantly been in flux in terms of changing who I am and interrogating my rhetoric and not being too fixed in something. I think that's sort of kept my practice quite authentic because I've acknowledged that yes, that was a time and this is a time, and there's no better or worse time. It's just a different landscape that we occupy. But certainly, I think pace is the one thing that I would bring up.
You said the amount of time it takes to read a book hasn't changed, but it certainly has changed the amount of time it takes to write one, right? I think that's something we're thinking about. Zulfikar, it sounded like you were going to say something.
Yeah, well, I guess I was, I mean, it's interesting to see also when we talk about intimacy and then also the stud closure. And I mean, a lot of my first performances were at the stud when I was doing sort of nightclub based performances. And not only that, I was always aspiring to perform at the stud. It was the place you performed. It was like once you got to the stud, girl, you are in the artsy scene, you're in the pool scene, you're in the disco scene, you're in the you know, if you're in the Castro, no shade to Castro, but also whatever. But the stud in Soma, you know, the leather district of San Francisco was the place you wanted to be. And it's interesting to see everything go online. The stud has been very influential in shifting things online, in shifting the drag world online. In this time of COVID, of coronavirus, the stud immediately was like, great, we're going online, you know? And my goodness, the level, the intimacy was definitely missing. You would sit at your home alone watching it, wishing you were getting sweaty in a nightclub. And you know, we started realizing how much we took that for granted, right? And but then with the digital space, it's interesting to see adaptability. You know, we're talking about time and we're talking about pre-internet, post-internet. I mean, I think the way that the queer community has adapted to these challenges and how quickly it has happened is pretty remarkable. But that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I guess, you mentioned the stud, so I'm thinking about that. You're describing the sweat, the intimacy, different kind of intimacy. I'd like you each to talk a little bit about what it means to be a performer versus a subject, because I feel like when something's captured, like I'm only familiar with your work through photography and video, but I wonder in the field, I guess I'm asking this also because I've been locked in for 3 months and haven't been in a sweaty room in so long. I need you to tell me, what was it like? How do you negotiate the distinction between performer and subject with regards to your body?
These are such good questions. So sad. Performer, and so when you say performer and subject, I guess I'm wanting to clarify, meaning like the persona behind, like the subject being the performance, the performer being me who prepared and planned it.
Yeah, like I'll just share something funny I heard on like a podcast somewhere. It's kind of dumb, but I thought it was cool. They were saying if you think about a dream, we can all remember dreams, whatever, I think most of us can remember a dream, and they feel real, and we always describe them as being like movies. But when you go to a movie, you find out at the end when they roll the credits that hundreds of people worked to make the movie, right? And it takes thousands of people to make a movie feel real. And in a dream, you're every person in the credits. Like in a dream, you're the entire cast, you're the Foley mixer, you're the best boy, you're the director, you're the first assistant director, you're the second assistant director. So I guess I'm sort of come from a psychoanalytical point of view, just what it means. It just has been so long since I've seen a live performance, but I personally find the experience so wildly different just in 3D IRL than when I watch a video. So as a member of a huge cast of characters that make a performance possible to being the performer, I wonder, it doesn't even have to be a compare and contrast. That's maybe the faulty part of my question. I just wonder if you two can speak to, performativity or performance, or, that magic, that what I don't even know what to call it, of, yeah, like an environment like the stud, or shooting video of yourself at Fisherman's Wharf, or, like whatever it is.
Mm. Yeah, I think we're always performing, all of us. The idea of performance isn't just about getting dressed up or being in guise of somebody or an alter ego to perform. A lot of my past work has been so rooted in what is termed in academia as autoethnography, the idea of becoming and living, and the lived experience, and just the experience without thinking too much about the end product, and just aligning yourself with a process and sharing a space with a community. A lot of my work is embedded in that, and it's very time-based. So I'd spend years in a particular place in order to become a mediation, to create some kind of an intervention or an embodiment of what I was experiencing. In terms of performance and the self, I found it really hard to separate the two, because I think ultimately what I strive for both in my life and in my practice is a moment of authenticity. So in both cases, even when I am performing, I am just showcasing a different aspect of myself. What do you think, Zulfikar?
Yeah, I agree. I feel so. I read a lot about jinn, and I read a lot about different forms of what we might call magic, but really, I guess, Muslim, mystic, esoteric practices that kind of fall between mysticism and sort of these conceptions of magic that we have in the West. And it's in one book there's an interesting it's by Amira El Zain, and it's called Islam, Arabs, and the Intelligent World of the Jinn. And if you don't know what jinn are spirits, Muslim spirits, or I mean spirits. They can be Muslim, they can be not Muslim. They're basically but like spirits, not like ghosts, but spirits like, I guess you could say nymphs and fairies, but even then we also have fairies. So it's they exist in a parallel world close to ours. And there's a very long tradition in Arabic poetry of that each poet, sorry, I'm waiting for the car. Each poet has his or her own jinn, or their own jinn, right? They have a jinn that follows them, that inspires them, that speaks into their ear. And when they recount stories of these jinn, they sometimes when they see them, they look exactly like them. Sometimes jinn can have horns, sometimes jinn can look like insects and animals, but these particular poets' jinn end up being versions of themselves, right? And I think of that when I think of my performance character, specifically Faluda Islam. She is like Qasim said, also she is another version of myself. She is an otherworldly manifestation. Not only has she been created as an otherworldly manifestation, and she actually is resurrected by Wi-Fi technology, talking about she's a zombie resurrected through Wi-Fi technology, talking about the internet and all of these things. And she's sort of a creature between zombie, ghost, jinn, and glitched file, right? That, glitched, well, you can't use this word anymore, but like virus, but like, digital. It's like, you just can't really go there as much, really. But, you feel my context.
Yeah.
And, um, and yeah, so for me, performance is an unveiling of another self. Like I can speak to my performance character, Faluda Islam, as someone else, right? I can be, well, what would Faluda Islam do? And really it's what would a more weird other version of me do? So yeah, no, I very much resonate with that. And then also with a prolonged practice, I mean, I've been doing this series Tomorrow We Inherit the Earth for now 3.5 years, which is small compared to some, but definitely the longest I've sort of focused on one project. And you really start to get into an interesting psychological state when looking at your work, when looking at, especially in the performance context, like Qasim was also saying, this investment in a role, in a space, and then you invest in a character, and it starts to do something pretty interesting. Yeah.
I mean, gins aside, I also think that those we break bread with, our foremothers, our forefathers, our intellectual parents, those we love, I think they leave an imprint. My teacher, my dance teacher, who I've journeyed with for the best part of my life, talks about the idea of the shagird, the light, those that surround the light. And I think about that a lot, because I think when you surround light, it leaves an imprint, and you embody that, and you become that, and you vision that. So I think people do affect you in a way that you become versions of them. And Zulfikar and I were talking about that in terms of mysticism and our relationship to Sufism, and how we were marrying into a lineage, and how we were imagining relationships and ceremonies with saints from the 16th, 17th century onwards. And I think that sort of love across time, which was something that we talked about, is really important in this discussion in terms of how we understand our relationship to performance. And again, there has to be this idea of personal truth and investment for it to be fruitful.
This is making me think a tiny bit about shamanism, a different sort of tack to how to treat the self as a vehicle for information. And it's the in a way, it's sort of the opposite of spirits. They're translators, right? But as humans, I think we're all human for now. I guess I want to ask, in the tangible and in the physical format that we're in, how do you then care for yourself if your relationship with your art craft is so porous? If you're describing your performances and your pieces as veils of yourself, and I'm picturing you both as sort of onions now, but how do you make sure the onion stays alive? Is that terrible? Maybe not onions. Anyway, something very layered and beautiful and delicious.
Don't worry, I love onions. I don't. Well, I mean, I've actually been asked this question before after I did the performance, the Queer Intifada that you showed documentation of at the Asian Arts Initiative, because it was a very intense performance in terms of content, in terms of, I mean, when I do my zombie thing, my voice is different, my body is different, I really have to go through a whole thing. And people have asked me, like, how do you do self-care? I think the work in itself is self-care. There's an intensity to it. There can be a discomfort to it. There can be a pain to it. But the work in itself is self-care, and like Qasim said, looking at these relationships that we construct in the work, it's an investigation into, I think, not only into figures in the past, historical figures that we've looked at, or religious figures or spiritual figures. It's also, in a way, us, I think, sort of trying to resolve our own relationships with ourselves, or our own unresolved relationships with people who we've loved and lost, and we use substitutes. Instead of their name, we'll use someone else's, or we'll think about someone who reminds us of them, or someone who they were connected to. So in many ways, it is, I think, a form of self-therapy that can get to a dangerous place, and it can be intense, and all of those things. But I think ultimately it is a self-care, I think.
I think we're in this with our eyes wide open. It is self-care. We are porous. We do put ourselves in very vulnerable situations, and but also I think it's a choice we've made. And it really reminds me of a beautiful story that's attributed to 16th century Saint Mirabai, who sort of she disregarded all the luxuries that she had and denounced the world for her love for Krishna. And when she was asked, why have you just denounced the world in such a way, she said, Mane to badnami meethi lage, which translates as, I find sweetness in this defamation. That yes, there is defamation within the context of queer, but there is a sweetness to that defamation, to that struggle. Just as Baba Bulleh Shah said that I will dance to win the favors of my beloved, even if it means becoming a whore. That I would potentially go through anything that is required of me to find union of some form with my beloved. And that could be a beloved which is, disembodied. And whenever we think about desire, we constantly think of bodies and sex. But actually desire is sort of so much beyond this idea of the embodied. And it can be disembodied, and it can be intangible, and all of those things.
I think I just became disembodied listening to you. That's wild and amazing.
I think, sorry, I just wanted to add on to that. That was something that even Qasim and I touched on in our video correspondences, which was the intensity of the erotic in our works. Something I noticed, Qasim, when you showed me, we were trying our best not to go too deep, and to sort of, I mean, I went pretty deep, but I think trying our best not to go too deep. But there's an intense eroticism that reminds me of, I think Audre Lorde uses of the erotic. The idea that the erotic is actually a form of sublime power, especially for Black femmes, and in the case that she was writing about in terms of taking back that power, the power of the erotic, and it having a more expansive sense. But also I think within the Sufi mystic Muslim context, the power of the erotic beyond the realm of sexual desire is, you know, the erotic as yeah, as this sort of more spiritual thing. Yeah, we shouldn't discount.
That's I want to say what's so just, oh, my heart just opens up so wide when I hear both of you talk about eroticism in this way, in the spiritual sense of because it is so inclusive. And that's such a weird word too, but because it's expansive and not, you know, I think in the West and in sort of white supremacist thinking, it's very monogamous and exclusive and singular and, you know, save yourself. And like the erotic is, vaunted to the point of being unapproachable, right? And that's why we're so scared of it. Maybe not erotic, but just full-blown sex. Like we treat it like holy grail that only one person can look at a time. But this feels much more orgiastic and in the most wonderful sense, right? Like it's, again, I just keep thinking expansive and inclusive. But and I think that to me is what is so beautiful about queer theory or queer identity and whatever language we use for it, this idea that the erotic can create, you know, I'm just repeating myself now, but I think you know what I'm trying to say. But then, you know, there's a phrase, let me pull up my notes because I loved it. I think one of you talked about the queer moment as disruptive. And I really like that too, because, and then you both teased out what it means to be a part of a social moment for now, on top of it being a spiritual reality of sort of what it means to be in this, you know, an ongoing sort of discussion for visibility and responsibility. And at the same time, just to know that that is a truth, that it is actually a very supreme truth, because it is your real and lived experience. I don't know if I have a question. I think I'm just kind of wowed by this thought of the erotic as spiritual. I don't know if you want to add to this.
Definitely, like queerness as disruption was something that we spoke about, and like Qasim said before, queerness is an expansive term, and I think there's something that I say over and over again, and it includes a profanity. Am I allowed to swear? We just heard someone swearing earlier, actually.
Yeah,
Really,
absolutely. Yeah.
at this point, the avenues are open for us at least. But queerness is not who you fuck, but the systems you try to fuck up. And I think that's something I hold on to, right? Because obviously I think it's important to include sexuality and gender, because otherwise, claiming queerness when someone has never had to experience the many traumas and pains that queer people have experienced, it gets tricky. So I try to still maintain that that's an important part in some way. But I think that, you know, queerness is standing in opposition. So therefore, it's standing in opposition to the norm. It's standing in opposition to the mainstream. It's standing in opposition to the political mainstream. It's constantly making a point and constantly investigating the world around you and investigating yourself. And often that leads to disruption. And I think it's okay for queers to have that as a marker of who we are. We are, we disrupt.
Yes, and absolutely. I think when we do try to contain that queer moment, just to extend what Zulfikar is saying, that we somehow lose the kind of the energy of it, and it becomes institutionalized. But also, I'm more and more interested in looking at the notion of queerness outside the frame of exclusively outside the frame of Euro-American sort of post-colonial LGBTQ contexts. I'm interested in looking at the more nuanced, familial aspects and where I derive those, from histories and different timelines, and homosocial spaces and same gender intimacy, which need not sort of translate into that um, homo hetero binary calculus of, you know, where do you sit on the sexuality spectrum? You know, are you this or are you that? And I just really believe that we are so much more capacious than we, you know, than we think, and that we can be many things at the same time. We need not have to choose and become one thing, because when we become one thing, we forget the plight of others. And I think there has to be a collective agency in understanding one's erotic intelligence, and developing that erotic intelligence so that it need not be a conversation about us and them in any forum.
I actually have a comment from someone while we're on that topic. Queer as a moment of disruption and erotic as spiritual, how amazingly put. How do you all feel about queerness being appropriated by institutions, even if by academia as a discipline?
Yeah, I think that's what I was getting to, that, you know, when that queer moment is institutionalized or theorized, it does become fixed. And for me, queer is about being in constant disruption and in flux or evolving in some way, that the moment you sort of tie it down, it loses its effectivity. But on the other hand, I also acknowledge that it's really important to understand trajectories. And the reason why I started this conversation with Zulfikar was because I think queer legacies are really important. So I do, you know, we don't have that sort of familial structure where knowledge is passed on from father to son. And in queer spaces, older queer men become mentors and father figures for younger queer men. And I'm speaking, you know, I mean, I'm talking about men, but I mean that generally amongst queer folk. So I think there needs to be these conversations about difference and how we interpret the term queer differently, that we shouldn't get too kind of aligned with that term. We should feel uncomfortable and question it and push ourselves to think, well, that's my queer, what is your queer?
I like that. That's my queer. What is your queer? I love that. I mean, it's interesting. I think it goes in many directions. I agree with Qasim. The academizing or the institutionalizing of queerness is makes it fixed, and this is the thing, right? If we didn't if we didn't have it, at least in an academic context, right, we wouldn't, you know, maybe we wouldn't have had books like Jose Esteban Munoz's Cruising Utopia, right? Or Disidentifications, where he challenges the institution through these books, right? He challenges, he talks about queerness as evolving constantly, right? Like that there is no you know, that queerness is actually a utopia. In an ideal world, we'd all be queer, quirky, and doing all sorts of things that are out of the norm, right? But we don't live in an ideal world. So I definitely see that. I think there is, you know, when we use the word co-opting, it's not just the academic context, it's also the you know, like how are institutions using queerness as a way of getting ahead, right? And we have you know, we're in a place where queerness is a buzzword, right? And we don't want it to be a buzzword. We want people to have a very genuine connection to this. We want people to be genuinely interested in our work, and I think that for me is important.
Sure. And I also want to just add to that, that it's important that we think about who gets to speak and who isn't allowed to speak. I think that is so crucial within institutions, academic or otherwise, art organizations, and who has the right to speak and who tells our stories. When can we tell our stories? When can we talk about you know, the complexity of our experiences, you know?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I want to just add that I think as far as the institutionalization or the codification of queer identities, or the theorizing or theorification of it, not to be that person, but I do think there's also I want to embrace queerness as an anti-capitalist notion too, right? One of the reasons this causes so much insecurity is because it becomes marketed and marketable. But if we resist that notion, or if we can, you know, like I think of school or academia's protection from some of that marketing and marketing thinking. Um, but now that colleges are revealing themselves to be also part of this corporate, you know, system, um, I'm not pretending that like I don't believe in money, but just that capitalist notion also troubles a lot of what are hard won, very organic, you know, discussions. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, like, do you mean sort of talking about queerness and institutionalism in relation to sort of the need and desire to make money and function in this world?
I mean, like, per the question of how we feel about queerness being co-opted, it's
Mm.
co-opted because it's sellable, right? I mean, it's because it can be turned into widgets, it can be turned into flags. And I like some of those things, but the original spirit of this was not for us to capitalize and become masters of the universe, I don't think. And so I guess that's all I wanted to think about is to constantly be thinking, you know, one thing about being anti-system is to be um, to resist exploitation, and a really simple form of exploitation Americans always take for granted is marketability, because it's so rewarding to be paid. It's hard to imagine what's it look like if we just refuse that transaction. Um, Again, I still understand money is very important, and I would never deny anybody their due values. Um, but it is something that's how I see it co-opted first and foremost, is just as lucre.
Yeah. No, for sure, sure.
So we have 5 minutes left, and of course we can go a little over time. Since I locked the meeting, so I don't know who can come in or who came in or not, but I know we have Alpesh here as our participant, and Alpesh, he's an art historian, wrote the book Queering South Asian Art History. So Alpesh, wanted to say hi to you. Then we have Amber here. Amber, you just shared a link, so if you want to talk about it when we open the forum. And I know Kira, Lara, of course, 12 Gates. So Qasim, you're familiar with Kira, of course, you and Kira.
Kira.
Yes, back and forth. And Lara is our intern at this moment, and she's the one who signed the card and did all the PR. But how do you all feel? Should we open it up to all our whoever? Like, I think it's a very beautiful small group of our participants.
Yeah.
Should we? Okay, sure. Amber, if you want to go first.
Sure, yeah, I had put in, I know the link became a kind of corrupted space for a while, and sort of in the interest of reclaiming it and also building on something you guys were saying, I threw in a link there to an article that was posted a few months ago at SADA, the South Asian American Digital Archive. SADA's current project is, or one of the grants we're working on right now, is we have an archival creators program. So we have 3 fellows who are actively creating collections from marginalized communities within the South Asian American community overall. And one of our fellows, Mustafa Saif, has been working on queer Muslim communities. He wrote this beautiful piece for our online magazine called Paving the Way for Cyber Queens. And I thought it kind of bridged, and where you started the discussion about the notion of online spaces really being pioneered as queer spaces, and then kind of this, what we're talking about later about inheriting pieces of our elders. And it also builds on an interview that's in the archive with Ifti Nassim, who is one of probably everybody knows, the founder of Chircon and in Chicago. And one of my students this semester just did a full transcription of that interview. So hopefully that will be available relatively soon at SADA, but I just wanted to draw people's attention to it. And thank you for this conversation, and thank you for to everyone for recovering it for ourselves. That was really beautifully done.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for doing that. And also Mustafa Saif is wonderful. They're a wonderful archiver, and we've had a nice chat. So I think it's amazing work to be archiving what, I mean, that's also the kind of the thing, the tension of the institution or the institutional lens is we still get archived. We can see that there's a base to work from. You know, we're not working in a vacuum. You know, we're not constantly working on something new. So it's important that at least we have our history, you know, like, and we're talking a lot about that. We're talking a lot about legacy. So know your legacy. That's why we have to invent legacy.
Anyone else?
Okay, anyone else want to add anything? Let me just go through my notes real quickly if I have anything from anyone else. Just multiple platforms, I'll do that. I guess, Alpesh, I think, are you, okay, it's fine. I think you probably can't hear us. But I just wanted to say thank you, all of you, for being here. And let me tell you, when this first thing happened, I thought it's my phone beeping. Something happened to my phone. And Amber, thank you so much for just chiming in. I was like, oh, I know these people. I can do this. I can handle this. You know, in the past couple of weeks, we all know it's been hard. On so many levels, like with epidemic, with our political environment, and what's happening in all cities. Today, I took my son, I said, okay, let's go out, and because we're entering into green phase, so let's see how Philadelphia is looking. And it's quite sad. Things are still boarded up. You know, people are still worried. But let me tell you, I know somebody recently said that I was rooting for Philadelphia, like it's city for artists, place for arts organizations, and we did get our share of a disappointment. But let me tell you, one part of that is there. But past couple of weeks, being in Philadelphia, that gave me so much energy, and you know, you have been really leading that path. It gave me so much hope and so much energy. So we have to continue the fight we are fighting in any form, in any way. And most importantly, we need to stay safe so we can be out there and fight our fight. That's how I can say that. But yes. So one thing I wanted to mention that Qasim's and Zulfikar's exhibitions are coming next year. So we are really shrinking the program, but I really was really excited to bring both of you back. So 2021 at 12 Gates. And yes, hopefully it won't be that virtual. We will be able to see each other. And thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here. And I do not want to end this conversation. So please someone say something about, so we can end the conversation.
Aisha, you were a hero today.
Yes.
You did something so important. You did something so important.
Thank you. No, we all, I'm telling you, I think you all were so familiar to me. Like, I was like, oh, whatever, I can do that. And the conversation was so brave. I think it just started it right, and you kind of paved the way for that conversation. That person paved the way for that conversation.
That's true. That's true. I just want to say thank you everyone for being here, and Qasim, yeah, for you know, getting to know you, and Anne, thank you so much, and everyone who's here and present, thank you for being present, and 12 Gates, of course.
Yeah, thank you.
I second that. I'd just like to thank everybody for watching and for having this wonderful discussion, for Aisha and Atif and 12 Gates to make this happen. So, looking forward to next year.
Absolutely. Stay tuned, 12 Gates 2021 with Zulfikar and Qasim Riza Shaheen. Thank you, take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.